in the presentation. Do we have any questions or some things that I did not cover?
I'm Kathy, and I do have a question. I actually have a couple, but I'll start with just one. I'd like to know how you address people. When I talk to people about immigration, I often get a couple of standard responses, and I just wanted to know what you would say to this. One of the most common ones that I've heard is, oh, you know, we're just spending all this money on these immigrants. You know, they're using up the resources of the United States, that kind of thing. So how much, I mean, what is actually, what are, I'm not talking about the ones that are here legally, or, you know, green card, visa and all that stuff, but the ones that are coming across the border that are either getting refugee status, that kind of status, or are just coming across and here.
Well, the first, I would say, if someone has been granted refugee status and has entered the United States as a refugee, they've taken years to get that grant. It's not something that is happens overnight. Usually clients that have refugee status have been in a refugee camp for a number of years before they're able to come to the United States. And then the second thing is, for the question of why, you know, people are coming into the United States and receiving these benefits, it's the law. It's legal to seek asylum in the United States. So it's the law of the United States. You can come to the United States and say, I fear persecution and seek protection under the United States law. So
I hear that, but I think that the people that are saying that, I want to give them facts about, you know, how much, you know, we're helping them as opposed to how much they're helping us. But like, just, you know, what is realistic? Somebody who seeks asylum, what kind of benefits are they able to get? For how long? How about people that just come across and we don't even really know they're here? Can they get benefits?
It depends on your state. If I'm in New York, if you come across the border and you do not have any documentation, you cannot receive benefits. The only benefit that you can receive is an emergency medical, meaning that if you are you can't go for preventative care. You can go to the emergency room. So that's the benefit that you can receive. If you come to the United States and you get released by immigration, you are technically under the color of law. So you may get a heightened level of benefits, but you don't get any public assistance because you need status to have benefits. You cannot come undocumented and have benefits. You need status.
Well, what would they receive? What would they actually receive then? People that are here under asylum?
If you are applying for asylum, or if you have a grant of asylum. So if you come here, you are applying for asylum. So after Title 42 ended, yes, there was an influx of immigrants coming into the United States. They have been at Western New York. We received the influx, about 100 or so coming from the United States. Through a grant of New York State, they're receiving housing, some food benefits, and I think just housing and food benefits. But until they file for asylum, they cannot legally work in the United States. So after they file for asylum, they have 180 days to actually receive a work authorization. So they can't work. That's the law in immigration. So they technically cannot work. There has been push for legislation to allow them to work sooner because obviously they're receiving benefits from the U.S., from the state. So they want to work, they want to contribute, but they can't because they don't have a work authorization. So yes, they receive benefits through grants, and it depends on what your state is giving. At this point, the New York State, there is a grant from federal funding to receive those benefits and housing and things like that. But I mean, I can only go back to they are legally here. So why shouldn't they be able to receive the benefits if they are legally pursuing asylum?
Thank you.
And I know you said you had other questions.
That's right. I'll let Josh ask first.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Attorney DeAbreu, Davis, Hollis. I have a question about the extent of variation across the country from one court to another, one state to another, when it comes to decisions about these various realms of status. Given what a diverse country we are culturally, politically, is there a lot of variation? It sounds like the SIJS or SIJS status needs to originate in a state juvenile court. And I imagine that there'd be great variation in that. But could you comment?
You're correct. There is a great variation of what your outcome would look like depending on what state you're in. And also the time frame. So in New York City, you're going to have a hearing in about 3 years. I just have a case where my client has a hearing in 2027. So if you are in Western New York, you are going to get a hearing within 6 months. The other issue is if you go into a more liberal state, California application is going to be granted versus if you are in Georgia. If my clients are released and they tell me they're going to California, I'm like, okay, you may get a hearing in a couple of years, you may get a grant. There may be some other benefits you'll be able to alleviate yourself of. But if a client is telling me they're going to Georgia, I'm like, this is not going to be a successful claim. If you are in Western, where I am in Western New York, the success rate for my clients are almost 90-something% denial. So it really, unfortunately, is a vast difference among states. But SIJS applications are usually, those are usually granted because the prima facie evidence is that you have someone that is able to file guardianship of you and that you don't have a parent in the United States. So those applications are usually a little bit easier and they're minor, so they're usually easierly granted than other applications.
Thank you. I'm sure there are other questions.
Well, if there's not, I'm going to ask another one then.
Sure.
So if I were to come with, say I have a 6-year-old daughter and I come across the border and I'm granted asylum and I say I moved to Connecticut. So what then can I expect in terms of help? Financial, housing, food? You know, can you give me some idea what that would be?
Well, I wouldn't be able to tell you what benefit you receive in Connecticut, but if you come across the border with your minor child, you can seek to file for asylum. If you're not placed in proceedings immediately, then you'd have to file an affirmative asylum application. So there's no, once you come to the border, you're not going to get granted asylum. You have to file it within a year. So that at that point, you're not. So if you come across the border and you on day one file for asylum, affirmatively, that's going to take a couple of months to years for you to get a grant.
So what do these people do? How do they survive?
Through help of nonprofit organizations, the resources within the cities and the towns. So a lot of, like I said, after 180 days, and that's 180 days after you file your application. So you must file it. You must file it affirmatively, you must file it in court, and then you have 180 days to file. So you're coming over here, you've traveled these months to get here, and no, you're not gonna initially know what to do or know where to file or know anything like that. So it'll take you time to even get settled. So sometimes they come and they have family members that they're going to reunify with, or they have an organization that they've hooked up with that they're gonna assist them, but they're not gonna file it right away, but they have to file within 1 year. So no, the first thing you're not thinking about is, no, I have to file this asylum application so I can get walker authorization. So yes, the resources are coming from the towns and the state funding.
So
it's not, go ahead.
Sorry, my name is Dave Kinnan. Thank you for this presentation. There's a lot of great information in here. One question I had that was in my mind with some of the current events in the news was the immigrant children that got separated from their parents. It seemed like they were kept together. But what I never understood and wondered if there was a CASA role is there's no advocate for them. Is DCFS in those states involved, or is that a federal level? Because they're separated from their parents, it just seems so complicated. Was there a role that CASA could play in that? Do they have a right to become citizens, or is that, you know, something completely separate, different, new, we don't have precedent on?
I'll start by saying the prior administration separated families at the border. So a year and a half ago, I had both female and male clients that were detained. So when they came across the border, they were detaining both male and female and placing the children into detention facilities separate from the parents. That was a separate proceeding from the children. So your parent could have had their hearing and be deported, and you remain in the United States. So I've seen in court, people say, I'm going to take a removal order. I want to go back home, get the removal order and say to the judge, well, where's my child? And just like, I don't have jurisdiction over your child. I only have jurisdiction over you. So they would have an order of deportation and not know where their children are. That was the prior administration's policy. At this point, they are not detaining women, but they are detaining men. So if you've come across the border with your father, you can still be placed in a detention facility as a minor child. But Josh would have to answer the question about what role CASA played in those situations.
Yeah, I'm just going to briefly say we get involved only if there's already a juvenile court on the child protection side involved, which also depends on the state DCF, Department of Children and Families, getting involved. So theoretically, there could be some young people whose cases we get involved in, but it has not happened yet in Connecticut, to my knowledge. So we'll have to see. And I also wanted to mention a local organization called IRIS, IRIS is the abbreviation. They have an extensive website. There's a lot of information there about services and resources for refugee children and families in Connecticut. And there's also a national organization called welcome.us. I think that's their website. That's kind of an umbrella with affiliations all over the country, including in Connecticut. I think often faith-based organizations get involved supporting refugee families. So those are a couple examples that folks might want to look up.
And a lot of times when families do come over, they do have family members in the United States that they intended to go reside with. So a lot of those minors were able to contact their family members or contacts in the United States and be placed with that family. But their parents did remain in detention if they weren't able to bond out or if they got a removal order.
Hi there. I actually did have a question. Are there any extra protections or anything in place for children who have disabilities and their parents are not documented? Or is there any way that they perhaps get expedited hearings or anything like that?
So if they are undocumented, it really depends on whether or not they're in proceedings. So if they're here and they don't have any immigration case going on and there's nothing going on, and they don't have a clear path to any kind of permanent status or visa, that would be more a social services question to see what benefits they have. I know in the United States, whether or not, not the United States, in New York, whether or not a minor is documented or undocumented, they do receive benefits within the state. But as far as disabilities, the only thing that I would say is if the parents were in removal proceedings, the child, a disabled child, if they had status, would actually benefit the parents, because there is an application that you can file for extreme and exceptional hardship to your qualifying relative being your child or spouse, that would actually allow the parent to get status. If you can show that it would be hardship for the minor child if you were to be removed from the United States. It's unfortunate that as immigration attorneys, we do look for things like that, like how much hardship there is if there is a qualifying relative. Can we get something that we can show the court that there is hardship if you were removed? But we do look for things like that.
Catherine, I saw you posted something in the chat about an organization called Kind. Would you like to comment beyond your post there?
Yeah, just that it's a national organization that invites volunteers to help with immigrant children. They look for interpreters. There's virtual opportunities, just different opportunities with that organization.
Thank you. Others?
I know that there was a question regarding whether or not you had United States citizen children and the parents were undocumented. If the parents are placed in removal proceedings, the parents can be removed. But like I said, if you can show the court that it would be a hardship on your child if you were removed from the United States, like say if you were the primary caretaker of that child, and if that you were to leave the United States, that child would not have a parent, then the court would be more likely to grant the parent the application. However, if you are undocumented and the other parent is in the United States, then it would be difficult for you to get status if the court knows that there's another parent that would be able to care for the child. So.
Well, can I ask another question then?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so this is such a big issue right now where I'm living. So we have a landscaping company in my condo complex, and most of the people are undocumented, and they're getting paid a lot less than the minimum wage. Okay, and I know that there's several of them that like live in one house in Branford here. There's probably about 20 people in that house, and they're just basically barely met. I want to know how common that is. And I guess I really just want to get some information. I mean, if you go on different sites, you get so much different information on the internet in terms of, how many people are coming here and taking advantage of the system and how many are working and getting underpaid. Do you have any site that you would recommend that we would go on that it would give them, what you think is the most accurate information about these kinds of questions so that I can address people who say things like that to me, like, oh, they're just coming here and taking our land, they're taking our jobs, we're spending all our money on them, and they want to close borders.
I don't know if I have a site to document, just because the issue is if you are in the United States and you are working undocumented, you're part of the culture, but you're not going to present yourself in society. I have clients that have been here for 20, 30 years undocumented and working, like you said, undocumented in those types of industries that can apply for a T visa, because they can apply for maybe trafficking or, getting low wages. But of course, they're not going to do that because then they open
Right.
themselves up to say that they're not documented. So the only times that you do come into contact with them is if they're put into removal proceedings. I have clients that come from downstate to upstate to work, and they make a wrong turn at the bridge because I'm in Buffalo, and then they get placed in removal proceedings. And they're like, I've been working here for 20 years and I've never gotten any enforcement. So it's hard to say because obviously the only time that you do get exposed is when they are put into proceedings. So I don't have any, I mean, I can only say that no one wants to come here and just not work, but they can't work legally because of because of how the laws are set up. So yes, you can say that they're draining resources, but they can't work because of the laws that we set up. And the pathway to come here with status, like I said, sometimes 15, 20 years. So until we fix the immigration laws, I don't see how, I don't see a fix, unfortunately.
I was just going to say, it sounds like that could be a case of labor trafficking. You were
Right.
talking about trafficking, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. That potentially could
Right.
be such a case.
Right. But that would be an affirmative application. So someone would have to, one, know that they're a victim of this, which a lot of times they don't even know that they just assume that it's okay to be paid less. They assume that it's okay to be treated this way. So they don't, one, know that they're a victim of these things, and two, they are really reluctant to put themselves out there and file an application because if they're denied, they get automatically put into removal proceedings. So, you know, what would be the real benefit to them? Unfortunately, there is no amnesty program to say, I am here and I haven't done anything. I've been here for 20 years. Please give me status. Like, there is no amnesty for that. I know the prior administration, the Obama administration would administratively close a lot of cases. So if you were here and you didn't commit a crime and you were otherwise keeping a low profile, they closed immigration cases. When the Trump administration came into play, the Trump administration actually reopened all the administratively closed cases. So then there were people here like 18, 20, 30 years now in removal proceedings and have no real path to status because they haven't even been in their home country for that long. So, I mean, I say that to say that the immigration laws change constantly, literally every single week. Depending on the administration, it changes also. So you can go from having DACA status to having no DACA status or ability to apply for DACA. And it's really unfair because, I mean, you have to have a consistency. So, I mean, I'm obviously an immigration attorney, but until we fix the laws, like these questions, these issues are still gonna continue. And I think the reason that we don't wanna fix it is because if you grant people status that have been here for so long, then you prevent people from filing the proper way.
I have a question about the extent of backlogs waiting now that you observe versus, say, before the pandemic. You were referring to the variation between New York City courts versus elsewhere, for example, but what would you say generally, Hollis, around the country? Is there a much greater backlog or wait than there used to be, or has it been a problem for a long time in most places and it's more or less steady, or what?
I can honestly say it is a mess. So there has been a backlog prior to COVID, and what happened is the backlog they put on the back burner. So newer cases are getting adjudicated faster than the older cases. So it's literally a mess. So you can file one application now and you can have an answer within 6 months to a year, but you can have a pending application that has been pending for 2-3 years because those applications have been put on the back burner. So it's really, can't even advise my clients sometimes as far as when your application is going to be adjudicated. I can say the ones that we file currently are being processed faster, whether I have some clients that are sitting there for 2-3 years without an answer.
Thank you. Any final questions?
Has there ever been a time during your career as an immigration lawyer where it hasn't been a mess?
It really, unfortunately, the asylum applications are really difficult. It's really difficult to be successful. However, applications like adjustments to green cards or cancellation of removals, they usually are more successful applications when I say not a mess, meaning that the client got what they should have gotten. Like I've had a client who was a young person and just messed up because of COVID, lost the job and was spiraled out of control. And if not for COVID, life would have been perfect. We had a hearing, family members came and talked about how good this person was and deserving of a cancellation application. Just he was making beds for foster kids, and then COVID happened, lost his job, spiraled out of control. So those applications are usually granted, and those are success stories. But unfortunately, there's such a dark cloud over the asylum process that usually the fear-based applications are less successful, and unfortunately they're just always it's difficult. It's always difficult, fear-based applications, unfortunately.
I have a question. As an attorney for these type of cases, how do you get paid?
New York State has a universal immigration program, meaning it's similar to a public defender style type model. So if anyone is in immigration proceeding facing deportation, they do get a court-appointed immigration attorney that is funded by New York State, and within the New York State budget, that is how my organization gets funded. So as long as you qualify financially, then you would be able to get an attorney. In other states, you have to pay for an attorney in removal proceedings.
In other states, you might have to pay, you said?
You have to privately pay. You do not get a court-appointed attorney.
Did you know about Connecticut?
I do not believe Connecticut is a universal representation state. So if you are facing removal proceedings, so a client can have a criminal conviction and be bonded out and serve their time and be placed in immigration proceedings and either be mandatorily detained, saying you can't get out because you committed a crime, even though you were released from criminal custody. And the bonds are much higher, so they're between $10,000 and $20,000. And then on top of that, yes, you would have to pay for a private immigration attorney that can run from $7,000 to $20,000 in immigration court.
That said, I believe that in a limited number of cases in Connecticut, there may be assistance available through legal aid organizations and/or clinics at law schools. But I would be really shocked if that could make up for the need. It's probably just a certain fraction of cases would be covered. Does that sound right, Attorney DeAbreu Davis?
That sounds right. And usually it's the cases that are have merit. Unfortunately, you would have an asylum case where, female genital mutilation or some case that has merit. We take all cases. So whether or not you have a relief in immigration court, and the relief can be, and I often am telling clients at this point, I think your best bet is voluntary departure. I think your best bet is a removal order. Like, I have those realistic conversations, but just to have someone in court with you when you don't speak the language and you don't understand the process is helpful. So it's not every case, even though I'm required to take every single case, it's not every case that I'm pushing an application. A lot of the times I'm just saying your best bet is to take a removal order or a voluntary departure order, but it's good to have someone next to you.
So if somebody is removed, like say back to Guatemala where they're being in danger of their life and stuff like that, there's nothing else they can do. They've sought asylum, they've been rejected. Because it sounds like in your case that most of the people are rejected. It sounds like, am I right in saying that?
Yes, in my court, there is a high number of denials. So if they are denied their application for relief, they can file an appeal. The issue is they will remain detained. And some people say, you know what, I don't want to sit in prison. I'd rather go back home and face what I fear versus sitting here in prison indefinitely. So they can file an appeal. And if the appeal is remanded, it goes back to court. But again, these clients are sitting in detention. And that's the question. The state is paying for the detention. Some of these clients don't even have a criminal record, but the state is still paying for them to be detained. So that to me is the hardship. Like you're paying for this person to remain detained versus letting them out and pursue their claim on the outside.
So actually people are better off coming into this country illegally and not seeking asylum.
Honestly, that's how the laws are set up. That's honestly what it comes down to. That's the push. And like this, we have to say, you need to make legislation. You need to fix the laws, because how it is set up, it is causing people to come to the United States and not come legally.
So why do you think that the immigration laws are not being fixed? It sounds like they're fixable.
They're not being fixed
reasons?
because you have people here that are undocumented for a number of years. And in order to fix that, you would have to address the millions of people in the United States undocumented. And in order to do that, you'd have to give them status. And that would be controversial, because if you gave 1 million people status because they're just here, what would the controversy be? They should have came here legally.
There was a brief period, I believe when George W. Bush was president and John McCain was in the US Senate, when the Congress came close to passing comprehensive immigration reform. It was for a time quite bipartisan, but that time seems to have passed.
Yes, so we are so polarized, and it's just not beneficial to come to a compromise regarding immigration, even though at this point it's gotten to the point where it is really serious.
It's such a grim picture you've painted for us, and especially where you are, where the rejection rate is so high. I'm wondering how you keep your spirit up doing the work that you do with so few happy outcomes.
And I'm sorry that that's the picture that I've painted. I don't do family-based immigration where my clients are in the United States and they're applying for their family members in another country and they're happy reunification. Unfortunately, I don't do that. I do removal defense. But again, what is successful to we measure success differently. So like I said, if I can get a client voluntary departure, meaning that they only get 3 years ban versus a 10-year ban, and they can try to come back to United States with authorization, that's fine. If I can get a client in front of the judge and just tell their story, because sometimes they just want to be heard. This is what happened to me in my country, and I want to be heard. Sometimes they're just being heard. They're like, I was heard, and I accept my removal order. And we try to find resources in their country so that when they go back, they have resources and help. So it is grim, but the success is measured differently.
Mm-hmm.
Any final questions?
I just have one more about refugee status. people apply for that before they come here, and currently, which countries are they accepting people as refugees from? You know what I'm saying?
You can apply for refugee status from any country, but you have to meet the requirements. So, you can apply for refugee status from any country, but usually, it's the countries, Sudan, Somalia, usually, those are usually my clients that have been in the United States with refugee status. Burmese, Burma, Vietnam, countries that have been through civil war and they have been displaced, they usually come in as refugees or can apply for refugee status.
So let's say a Syrian person or an Afghan person were to apply for refugee status. How long would that take for them to hear back?
It would take a number of years. If they are applying now, it would take a number of years, and usually they're not residing in that country. They're somewhere else in a refugee camp or a non-permanent status in another country pending their application to the United States.
Thank you.
And I'll just add that I know in the New Haven area, we've had quite a few refugee families come from not only the countries that Hollis mentioned, but also you just mentioned, Kristen, Syria, Afghanistan, also Yemen, I believe, among others. So again, IRIS, IRIS, would be a resource here in Connecticut that would have more information.
And they go through a serious vetting process. So they have their medicals, their background, their criminal. So they come to the United States seriously vetted. So it's a process. It's a lengthy process.
Thank you for giving us information and trying to educate us a little bit more. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much for this presentation and for the work you do.
Thank you.
And I'll invite anyone who wishes to turn on their camera for a quick screenshot. I've tried to take one or two along the way to document this for anyone who was already on screen. Anyone else should feel welcome now. I'll try one or two and then we'll say goodbye. All right. 1, 2, 3. Thank you again, and we will make the recording available to you in some days. I think my colleague, Catherine, who's been on this call, will help us. And I want to thank Julie again for handling the slides.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.